The scream never carried through the storm. It was devoured by the wind before it could travel beyond the frozen lake, muffled by the unrelenting howl of snow that twisted and spun like ghosts in the night. The sky was a blur of green and violet light, the northern lights sweeping their ribbons of color across the heavens as if mocking the horror below. A figure moved slowly across the ice, dragging something heavy behind. The movement was steady, deliberate, leaving a faint trail that would soon vanish under the thickening snow. The body, a woman limp and lifeless, left a faint red smear on the white surface, her hair tangled with frost and ice crystals, her camera strap still tangled around her wrist. The storm made sure no one would ever hear her story. When morning came, the sky was clear again, an almost cruel kind of brightness reflecting off the vast frozen expanse. The town of Black Ridge stirred awake in the cold silence of the Alaskan wilderness. A place so small and remote that time seemed to move differently there. A cluster of wooden cabins, a general store, a church that hadn't seen a service in months, and a sheriff's office with a single truck parked outside. The locals were used to isolation. They lived by it, depended on it, but that morning there was something off in the air. A heaviness, a stillness that made even the ravens quiet. Sheriff Alan Crow stood by the edge of the lake, his breath forming a steady plume in the frozen air. He was a tall man with a worn face, the kind of face carved by years of hard winters and harder truths. His parka was zipped to his throat, his gloves stiff with cold as he crouched down to examine something on the ice. It was a thread, thin, crimson, frozen mid-stretch across the surface like a fragile vein. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. Blood looked the same anywhere in the world, but against the glacial blue of the lake it looked almost unreal, like paint spilled on glass. He stood and turned toward the deputy beside him, a young man barely out of his 20s named Harris. The kid looked pale, shifting his weight from foot to foot as if the ice beneath him might give way at any moment. "You think it's her?" he asked quietly, his voice breaking the brittle silence. Alan didn't answer right away. The question didn't need one. Everyone already knew who was missing. Elena Porter. The call had come in just before dawn from her brother, who lived 3 cabins down the ridge. She had gone out last night to photograph the aurora, something she'd done 100 times before, but this time she didn't come back. Alan had known Elena. Everyone in Black Ridge did. She was one of those rare souls who didn't seem afraid of the wilderness. While most people stayed close to the fire, Elena went looking for beauty in the coldest corners of Alaska. Her work, photographs of ice caves, wolves, and northern skies, had been published across the country. But her last few weeks had been different. She'd been restless, distracted. She'd told Alan she was working on something new, something big. She never said what it was. When they found her camera half buried in the snow, it was still warm to the touch. The lens had been cracked, the strap torn, but the memory card was intact. Alan brought it back to the station and played the footage on his old desktop computer. Most of the shots were typical of Elena's work. Slow pans of the aurora, the glittering snow, the frozen lake reflecting the green sky. But the last file was different. It was shaky, rushed, and ended abruptly. In the final seconds of the recording, Elena's breath fogged the lens as she turned toward something behind her. The faint outline of a man appeared in the reflection of the ice. A hood pulled tight around his face, fur-trimmed, his silhouette towering in the dark. Then the camera jerked violently and the screen went black. Alan played the clip again and again. Each time he caught some new, almost imperceptible detail. The tremor in her hand, the faint sound of footsteps that didn't match hers, a low breath that didn't belong to her. He leaned closer, staring at the frozen frame where the reflection appeared. It was distorted, but not enough to erase what was there. Someone had been with her that night. The sheriff rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in. He'd handled missing persons before. Hunters who got lost, drifters who froze to death, even the occasional suicide. But this felt different. There was intent here. There was a darkness that didn't belong to the wilderness alone. By noon, the snow had started falling again. Alan and Harris organized a small search party. A few locals, a rescue dog, and a snowmobile. They combed the area around the lake, moving in slow, deliberate lines. The ice groaned under their weight, the sound echoing through the valley like a distant moan. The dog barked once, then went silent, nose pressed to the snow. Harris pointed to a faint impression near the shore, a boot print half filled with fresh snow. Alan knelt to examine it. The tread was deep and wide, the kind used on heavy-duty work boots. Not the kind Elena would wear. And not a hunter's either. Whoever left it had been out there after her. As the daylight began to fade, Alan called the search off. It was too dangerous to continue after dark, and the storm was closing in fast. Back at the station, the wind rattled the windows like fingers tapping on glass. Harris filed his report while Alan stared at the map pinned to the wall. The lake stretched out like a white scar across the land, bordered by dense forest and sheer cliffs. If someone wanted to hide a body, there was no shortage of places to choose from. But Alan couldn't shake the image of the frozen thread of blood. It wasn't much, but it was a sign, a silent confession from the ice. That night, Alan sat alone in his office, the camera beside him on the desk. He poured himself a cup of coffee gone lukewarm hours ago and stared at the window. Outside, the aurora shimmered faintly through the clouds. He thought about Elena, how she had smiled when she showed him her latest shots, how she had said the ice held stories if you listened close enough. He wondered what story it was telling now. The phone rang suddenly, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Harris calling from his cabin. "Sheriff," he said, his voice tight with unease. "You might want to see this." Alan drove through the storm, headlights cutting through the darkness. When he arrived, Harris was waiting by his porch holding a crumpled photograph. "I found this in the archives," he said, handing it over. The picture was old, maybe 20 years. It showed a group of men standing on the same lake, posing beside a drilling rig. One of them wore a fur-lined hood identical to the one in the reflection on Elena's camera. Alan studied the photo, a cold shiver crawling up his spine. The man's face was half hidden by shadow, but the eyes were unmistakable, dark, hollow, and watchful. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, was a name, Jonas Riker, a local hunter. A man who still lived on the outskirts of Black Ridge, a mile from the lake. As Alan looked back toward the window, he thought he saw movement out in the snow. A flicker of motion, quick and soundless, disappearing into the trees. He told himself it was the wind or a trick of the light, but deep down, something in him knew the truth. The storm had buried the evidence, but not the crime. Somewhere beneath the ice, the truth was waiting, cold, silent, and patient. The town of Black Ridge had always hidden its secrets well. On the surface, it was a quiet Alaskan settlement where everyone seemed to know everyone else, where the same handful of faces gathered at the diner each morning for coffee and gossip, where doors were rarely locked and where trust was supposed to mean something. But after Elena Porter's disappearance, that fragile sense of security began to crack. Whispers ran through the town like frost spreading across glass. People avoided eye contact, lowered their voices, and locked their doors earlier than usual. The wilderness had always been dangerous, but now the danger felt closer, human, deliberate, and watching. Sheriff Alan Crow spent the following morning visiting every house in the valley. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he moved from cabin to cabin, knocking, waiting, and reading faces as much as he listened to words. He noticed the small tells, the hesitation before answering a question, the darting of eyes, the quick denial that felt too rehearsed. Most of them had seen or heard nothing, or so they claimed. But one thing stood out. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about Elena. Some admired her. Others thought she was reckless, even arrogant, for venturing out alone into the wilderness at night. A few muttered that she had been asking for trouble by prying into other people's business. It was at the general store that Alan heard something worth following. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Kincaid, was sweeping the front steps when he arrived. She looked nervous, her hands gripping the broom handle too tightly. When Alan mentioned Elena's name, Sarah's expression flickered with something like guilt. "She was here 2 days ago," she said finally. "Bought batteries, extra film, and some canned food. Said she'd be out by the ridge for a few days working on her story." Alan raised an eyebrow. "Did she say what kind of story?" Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the door to make sure no one was listening. "She said she'd found something she wasn't supposed to. Told me if anything happened to her I should tell you to check the lake." The lake. Always the lake. Alan thanked her and stepped back into the cold, his mind racing. If Elena had suspected something dangerous, why hadn't she come to him directly? Why had she gone alone? As he returned to the station, the answer began to take shape. Elena had been investigating illegal hunting in the area for months, poachers killing wolves and caribou to sell pelts across the border. She told Alan about it once, mentioning that some of the hunters were locals, but she hadn't given names. Now it seemed she'd finally found proof that someone had been willing to kill for her. By afternoon, Alan was standing outside the cabin of Jonas Riker. The place sat on the far edge of the woods, a squat structure surrounded by rusting snowmobiles and animal traps. Jonas had lived there all his life. He was a large man with a beard like tangled wire and eyes that never seemed to blink. Alan had known him since childhood, but familiarity didn't mean comfort. Jonas had a reputation, temperamental, unpredictable, and always armed. When Alan knocked, Jonas answered slowly, a cigarette hanging from his lips. "Sheriff," he said, smoke curling from his mouth. "Didn't expect company." Alan met his gaze. "You heard about Elena Porter?" Jonas nodded, expression unreadable. "Hard not to. Whole town's buzzing about it." Alan glanced past him into the cabin. The wood stove was burning, the air thick with the smell of tobacco and something metallic. "Your snowcat's missing," Alan said. "Care to tell me why?" Jonas smirked faintly. "Took it out last night. Checking my traps. Storm came in faster than I expected. I left it near the ridge. Figured I'd pick it up today." Alan stepped closer. "You were out near the lake?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He flicked the cigarette into the snow and watched it hiss. "You think I had something to do with that girl?" he asked finally. His tone wasn't angry. It was flat, almost weary. "I didn't even like her," he admitted. "But I wouldn't hurt her. She was just a kid with a camera." Alan held his stare. "She wasn't a kid, Jonas. And you did threaten her last week at the diner. Several people heard you." Jonas's eyes narrowed. "I told her to stay out of my business." "That's not a threat. That's advice." Alan looked past Jonas, scanning the yard. A few traps lay half buried in the snow, their metal jaws smeared with blood. Nearby, a rifle leaned against the porch rail. He couldn't see the snowcat, but a faint trail of tread marks led into the woods. "We're going to take a look out there," Alan said. Jonas shrugged. "Suit yourself. But I'm telling you, I didn't touch her." The sheriff followed the trail for nearly a mile before it ended abruptly near the edge of the frozen valley. The wind had shifted, scraping the surface of the ice clean in places. There, just beyond a patch of drifted snow, the tire marks vanished into nothing. Alan approached cautiously, the ground creaking beneath his boots. Then he saw it, a thin crack in the ice just wide enough to peer through. He dropped to one knee, brushing away snow. The beam of his flashlight cut through the translucent surface, and what he saw stopped his breath. Beneath the ice, barely visible through the distortion, was a face. Pale, still eyes wide open, Elena Porter stared up at him through the glassy blue surface, her features frozen in terror. Her camera strap was still around her neck, her gloved hand reaching upward as if she had tried to claw her way out before the ice sealed over her. The water beneath her was a deep dark blue, silent and endless. Alan's throat tightened. He didn't call for Harris. He didn't shout. He just knelt there in silence, the enormity of it pressing down on him like the cold itself. When he finally stood, his hands were shaking. He marked the spot and turned back toward the woods, moving fast, his mind spinning. If Jonas had left his snowcat here, he could have easily dumped her body through the crack before it froze over. But something about it didn't fit. Jonas was reckless, yes, but not clever. And the scene felt too careful, too intentional. Back in town, Alan questioned Jonas again, this time at the station. Under the harsh yellow light, Jonas looked older, smaller somehow. He didn't deny that he'd argued with Elena. He admitted following her once, hoping to catch her snooping near his traps. But he insisted he left her alive. She wasn't the only one out there, he said quietly. I saw another snowmobile that night. Headlights cutting across the lake. Thought it was hers, but now I'm not so sure. Alan leaned forward. You're saying someone else was there? Jonas nodded slowly. I couldn't see who. The storm hit hard. But whoever it was, they were waiting, watching. He took a drag from the cigarette Alan had let him light. You ever notice how the ice out there groans, Sheriff? Like it's remembering something? That lake's got layers of death in it. Hunters fall through, animals drown. Things get buried under the freeze. You'll never find them all. Alan didn't respond. He just stared at Jonas, trying to decide if the man was telling the truth or trying to twist it. The blizzard outside rattled the windows, howling against the station walls. Harris sat quietly in the corner, taking notes, glancing up every now and then with the look of someone who didn't want to be part of this conversation. When Jonas was finally released, Alan stayed behind, reviewing Elena's footage once more. The reflection haunted him. The hooded man could have been Jonas, but there was something off about the posture. Too tall, too still, almost statuesque. And then there was the sound at the end of the recording. A faint clicking noise like metal striking metal. He slowed it down, turned up the volume. The pattern was rhythmic. Not footsteps, not wind. It was mechanical. He leaned back, heart beating faster. Somewhere in that frozen wilderness, something else had been moving the night Elena died. Something not bound by the storm or by the fear that kept the townspeople inside their homes. As the aurora shimmered faintly through the frosted window, Alan knew that Blackridge's calm was only an illusion, and whatever killed Elena was still out there, waiting beneath the endless stretch of ice. Jonas Riker's confession unsettled Sheriff Alan Crow in ways he couldn't put into words. There was something behind the man's calm voice, something too composed for someone being accused of murder. Most people broke under the weight of such questions. They got defensive, angry, desperate. But Jonas had only smiled, that faint, bitter smile, as though he already knew how little his words would matter. Alan had seen killers bluff before, but this felt different. It was as if Jonas were resigned, almost relieved to be suspected, like it might finally draw attention away from something, or someone else. After the interrogation, Alan left the small holding cell and stepped out into the cold corridor. The walls of the sheriff's office creaked softly, the wood swollen with moisture from the storm outside. Harris was waiting for him near the window, arms crossed, face pale. You really think he's telling the truth? He asked. Alan didn't answer right away. He walked to the desk, poured himself coffee gone lukewarm, and took a long sip before speaking. I think he's telling a truth, he said finally. Just not the one we're looking for. Jonas's words echoed in his head. You're looking for someone else. Someone who's been using my tracks to hide his own. Alan replayed the scene over and over. The tracks in the snow, the cracked ice, the reflection on Elena's camera. There were too many pieces that didn't fit. Jonas was volatile, sure, but the crime scene had been too precise, too deliberate. The blood had been minimal, the body placed perfectly beneath the ice as if arranged for discovery. It was the kind of cruelty that took planning, not rage. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The blizzard outside beat against the cabin walls like a living thing. Alan sat in his chair, the dim lamp casting long shadows across the room, while Elena's final photograph sat on the table in front of him. He studied every inch of it. The frozen lake, the faint glow of the aurora, the blurred outline of a man standing behind her. And then his eyes caught something he hadn't noticed before. Elena's reflection wasn't centered. Her gaze wasn't on the man behind her. It was fixed slightly to the left toward something else. Alan leaned in closer, heart starting to thud. In the blurred reflection of the ice, faint but unmistakable, was another shape, taller than the first, unmoving, watching. He felt a chill creep up his spine. There had been two people there that night. One behind her, one beyond her field of vision. The realization cracked open a deeper unease. If Jonas wasn't the one who'd done it, then who the hell had been out there with them? By morning, the storm had calmed. The world outside looked deceptively peaceful. Fresh snow, smooth and untouched. The sky a dull gray. Alan gathered his coat and drove to the morgue, a squat concrete building on the outskirts of town where Dr. Mason Thorne worked. Mason had been Blackridge's medical examiner for nearly a decade. Quiet, precise, the kind of man who never spoke more than necessary. Alan trusted him more than anyone in town. If anyone could make sense of what had happened to Elena, it would be Mason. Inside, the air was sharp with disinfectant and cold enough to sting the lungs. The hum of the generator was the only sound. Mason was bent over a metal table, a microscope in front of him, his breath fogging faintly in the chill. "You've heard," Alan said. Mason looked up briefly, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. "Hard not to," he said. "You brought her in this morning." He nodded toward the covered shape on the table. Alan hesitated before lifting the sheet. Elena's face was pale, the skin waxy and smooth. Her expression was frozen in that same look of terror, lips slightly parted, eyes half open. Mason spoke softly as he worked. "No signs of blunt trauma. No fractures. No gunshot wounds. Cause of death appears to be hypothermia." He paused, adjusting his gloves. "But..." Alan looked up. "But what?" Mason frowned. "There are bruises on her wrists and neck. Light but deliberate. Someone held her down. And there's something else." He pointed to a small mark just below her jawline, almost invisible against her skin. Needle puncture. Fresh before death. Whatever was injected caused paralysis. She would have been conscious but unable to move. Imagine freezing alive, unable to scream. Alan felt his stomach tighten. "You're saying someone drugged her first?" Mason nodded. "Most likely. But whatever was used, it metabolized quickly. The cold preserved the body, but not the chemical trace. I can't identify it without a full lab test." He straightened and removed his gloves. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The sheriff stared down at Elena, the horror of it settling deeper. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was controlled, methodical. Someone had planned this with precision. He left the morgue and stepped back into the cold, his breath sharp as he exhaled. The northern sky had darkened again, clouds gathering like bruises. He drove back to Jonas's cabin, but the place was empty. The door stood slightly open, swinging in the wind. Inside, the fire had gone out. A half-eaten meal sat on the table, still frozen. A trail of footprints led from the back door toward the forest. Alan followed them until they disappeared into a mess of animal tracks. He crouched down, brushing the snow with his glove. Jonas was gone, but he hadn't left in a hurry. No signs of struggle, no signs of fear. It was as if he'd simply walked away. Back at the station, Harris met him with a stack of papers and a grim expression. "Sheriff," he said, "you need to see this." He laid out 3 missing person reports, all from the past 6 months. Each one had gone cold. 2 hunters and a park ranger, all last seen near the same lake where Elena's body was found. Alan's pulse quickened as he read through them. "We searched for these people," he said. "We never found bodies." Harris nodded. "I know, but look at the dates. Each one disappeared right after a major storm. Just like Elena." Alan leaned against the desk, the pieces falling into place. If this pattern was real, then Elena hadn't been the first. She was just the latest. He turned toward the window, the fading light glinting off the snow outside. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath the ice or buried in the woods, lay more than just one secret. That night, Alan sat alone again, Elena's camera footage playing in a loop on his computer. He slowed it down frame by frame, listening carefully. The wind howled, her breathing quickened, then that same mechanical clicking returned. He turned the volume up until the sound filled the room. Click, pause, click, click. It wasn't random. It was measured, patterned. It reminded him of something familiar, something metal rotating. Then it hit him. A crank, a hand auger, the kind used for drilling holes in ice. The realization sent a chill through him. Whoever had killed Elena hadn't dumped her body after the fact. They'd prepared a hole beforehand. They'd been waiting for her. That was the precision Mason had recognized. Alan stared at the footage one last time. As the reflection flickered across the ice, he saw something new in the final frame. Just as the camera fell, a faint shape appeared. Something round and gleaming hanging from the killer's neck. A medical pendant. He froze. Mason Thorne wore one just like it. For a long moment, Alan couldn't move. His thoughts spun wildly, his breath quickening in the silence. It didn't make sense, or maybe it made perfect sense. Mason had access to chemicals, to sedatives, to the cold storage where bodies could be hidden for weeks. He'd been the one to examine every unexplained death in the area. He'd signed every report, and no one ever questioned him because in Blackridge he was the voice of certainty. Alan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. The wind outside had started to howl again. He reached for his coat and holstered his revolver. Whatever truth was buried under that ice, it was time to drag it into the open. But as he stepped into the storm, he couldn't shake one thought. Mason had been right there beside him the whole time, dissecting death, studying silence, and smiling while he did it. The storm rolled in with a vengeance that night, sweeping over Blackridge like a living creature reclaiming its prey. The wind shrieked through the pines, snow spun across the frozen valley in wild spirals, and the lake, vast, black, and silent beneath its armor of ice, waited like a mouth sealed shut. Sheriff Alan Crow gripped the steering wheel as his truck rattled down the narrow road toward the lake, the wipers barely keeping up with the fury of the snow. His headlights carved through the white chaos, lighting only what was immediately ahead. A tunnel of light in a world gone blind. Every instinct told him to turn back, to wait until morning, but he knew better. Waiting had already cost lives. Elena Porter's face haunted him each time he closed his eyes. Those wide, frozen eyes staring up from beneath the ice, pleading for justice that never came. The closer he got to the lake, the heavier the air felt. The wind seemed to ease for a moment, as if the world were holding its breath. He parked at the edge of the forest and stepped out, boots crunching into the snow. The storm's sound dulled here, replaced by an eerie stillness. His flashlight beam trembled across the whiteness, revealing the faint outline of the frozen fissure where he had found Elena. The ice was sealed again, the snow smooth and undisturbed, as though nature itself had erased the memory of what happened. Alan took a slow step forward, hand instinctively resting on the revolver at his hip. A sound cut through the quiet, a soft crack, then a whisper barely audible over the wind. He turned sharply. Nothing. Just the dark silhouette of the trees, their branches swaying like slow dancers. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. A man's voice, low, measured, and unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come alone." Alan's breath clouded in front of him. He knew that voice. Dr. Mason Thorne stepped out from behind the shadow of a birch tree, the snow crunching softly under his boots. His long coat flapped in the wind, and his face was illuminated by the green shimmer of the aurora rippling faintly above. His expression was calm, his eyes steady behind his glasses, but there was something hollow in them, an emptiness Alan had never seen before. "I had a feeling you'd figure it out," Mason said, his tone polite, almost conversational. "You always were sharper than the rest of them." Alan's hand hovered over his gun. "What did you do to her, Mason?" The doctor smiled faintly. "To Elena? The same thing I did for the others. I gave them peace." His voice carried a strange calm that made Alan's stomach twist. "You think this place doesn't eat people alive, Alan? You think the snow, the silence, the endless dark, it doesn't get inside you? It does. It rots people from within. I just helped them along." Alan took a step closer, every muscle tight, every instinct screaming. "You murdered them. You drugged them and froze them like specimens." Mason tilted his head slightly as though pondering the word. "Murder," he said softly. "It's such a simple label for such a complicated mercy." His hand slipped into his coat pocket and Alan's voice cut like ice. "Don't." For a long moment, neither moved. The wind hissed across the lake, and the ice groaned beneath their boots like something alive. Then Mason spoke again, quieter now. "Elena found the site. She wasn't supposed to. She saw what was buried beneath the ice. The old research tunnels, the bodies. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. She wanted to expose me, to turn this place into a circus. So I did what I had to do." His tone never rose, never cracked. "You've seen what's out there, Sheriff. You know this land doesn't forgive weakness. It swallows it." Alan drew his revolver. "You're coming with me." Mason chuckled softly, a sound that had no warmth. "No, I don't think I am." In one fluid motion, he pulled something from his coat. A hunting knife, its blade catching the flicker of green light. The world seemed to narrow, the space between them shrinking. Mason's face was expressionless, his movements smooth and deliberate as if rehearsed 1,000 times in the stillness of his lab. Alan raised his gun. "Don't make me do this." The doctor stepped closer, his breath fogging the air between them. "Do you know what happens to bodies under the ice, Alan?" He whispered. "They don't rot. They stay perfect, untouched, like memories that never fade." He lunged. The blade flashed, slicing through Alan's coat. The sheriff stumbled back, firing once. The gunshot shattered the quiet, echoing across the frozen lake. Mason jerked but kept moving, eyes wide with something close to ecstasy. The second shot tore through the air and the doctor fell forward, collapsing onto the ice with a hollow thud. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The snow fell slower. The sound of the wind died. Then came a deep, resonant crack from beneath Alan's feet. The ice, already weakened by the storm, began to split. He looked down and saw a spiderweb of fractures racing outward, dark lines against the pale surface. Mason's body twitched, blood pooling across the cracks, seeping downward. Alan holstered his gun and reached forward instinctively, but the ice gave way. In an instant, both men plunged into the freezing darkness below. The world beneath the surface was silent and endless. The cold hit like a wall, stealing Alan's breath, paralyzing his limbs. He struggled, his body sluggish, the weight of his coat dragging him downward. Through the greenish haze of the water, he saw Mason drifting near him, eyes open, face calm even in death. Bubbles of air rose from the wound in his chest, floating upward like fragments of confession. Alan kicked toward the light above, but his strength was fading. His fingers brushed the underside of the ice, the smooth, unbreakable barrier just inches from survival. Through the shimmering glass, he thought he saw movement. Shapes, faint and wavering like figures suspended in the ice. Faces. Dozens of them. Pale, still eyes open. Elena among them. The others too. The missing hunters, the ranger, all preserved in the frozen cathedral beneath the lake. Mason's work perfect and eternal. Alan's lungs burned. His vision blurred. He slammed his fist against the ice once, twice, but it held firm. Above him, the storm howled again, the snow covering any trace of the cracks. The cold swallowed him whole, pulling him down, and then everything went still. When the storm cleared 3 days later, rescue teams found the sheriff's truck parked at the tree line, engine dead, keys still in the ignition. The ice was intact, smooth and unbroken. They found only one thing at the site, a badge, half frozen near the fissure, its metal glinting faintly in the pale sunlight. The town of Blackridge mourned quietly. The official report listed Alan Crow as missing, presumed dead. Dr. Mason Thorne was never found. His cabin stood empty, his notes gone, his laboratory stripped bare. Only rumors remained, rumors that he had been conducting research beneath the lake, experimenting with preservation, with death itself. When spring came and the thaw began, the lake cracked open like a wound, the ice groaning as it bled meltwater into the valley, but no bodies surfaced. The locals said the lake kept what it wanted, and on certain nights when the aurora dances across the sky, the people of Blackridge claim they can see movement beneath the frozen water. Two figures drifting side by side, locked forever in a slow, silent struggle. The sheriff and the doctor, justice and madness, bound together in the cold heart of Alaska, where the ice remembers every scream it swallows.